So what I've done is, on the left-hand side, I've got the unit specification, and on the right-hand side, the presentation and the slides. Now, there are lots of slides in this presentation because this is meant to be a bit of a, let me put it this way, background to why human resources management is actually required when you're studying, a management qualification at pretty much the master's level. Now, we know that one of the main, types of resources which are there in organization, apart from financial resources, infrastructure, administrative, one of the key resources in the 21st century is primarily human resource or people or
human
staff.
Resource.
Human resource.
People.
So what we get to see is that sometimes when taking an example by, starting the unit just before that, sometimes you see that companies look at finding out, when they look at employing recruitment agencies, they do a lot of intensive research to find the right staff with the right skill, the right attributes, the right behavioral pattern, which they can
competencies.
So it is the reason why they look at this as an objective is that today, if you have the right people who are proactive, passionate, are committed, loyal to the organization, what you will see is that the productivity and efficiency within the organization is quite high. The staff is more motivated, the staff is loyal, and if you find that they have the right skills to be able to do the job which they are requiring to do when they are hired, you will find that obviously it adds to the company's objectives, achievement of company's objective and goals. So in this unit, what we are looking at doing is we are going to understand the background of why human resources management is important. How do we look at, the aspect of, let's put it this way, how do we look at the aspect of the strategic nature of HRM? So the word strategic has been added because of a particular reason. So we'll understand what is human resource management, but we'll also understand how this function contributes towards the strategic objective of the organization. And while studying this particular unit, what we want to look at is focus on the fact that if you are given the HR role, or if you have the resources management role, that means you work in a business or you work as a manager and you have responsibility of a number of people or staff working within the organization. How do you manage them? How do you ensure that they perform? You look at their problems and issues. How do you solve them? Because as a manager, you're required to do all these things. You're required to look at issues. You're required to look at problems, come out with solutions, boost their morale, look at getting, performance from them after giving them tasks, and at the end of it, also review their performance. So we'll understand this concept in, 4 learning outcomes, in this particular unit. In the first one, what we want to be able to do is understand why human resources is important, importance of HRM. In short, let me not repeat the word again and again, but I will say that why and what is the role of HRM within an organization, and why is their role critical to help the organization or business achieve an objective. If you have 5 sales managers and the company's target this year is to achieve, say, £1 million in terms of turnover, what you will find is that if the sales managers recruited or working within the organization are not up to the mark in terms of performance and do not have the skill set to be able to perform, you will not see the organization actually achieving the target at all. So from that context, the recruitment and selection process, HR has lots of functions. There are 10 functions of HR, there are different functions of HR, blah, blah, blah. But what we do get to see is that, at some stage, some of the most important functions which a human resources manager focuses on in his role is to look at doing recruitment and selection of people for the organization as per the job description given. And that is what the reason of studying this particular unit is. In the first learning outcome, we are looking at understanding what are the various models, how this particular subject is evolved over the years, and then we'll understand things like hard HRM, soft HRM, Ulrich's model. We look at the Harvard model. We look at different models which have defined how this department works, how this particular function works within the organization. Now, very briefly, looking at how do you define HRM? There are different types of HRM, and we should not get confused before we get into the definition here. When we look at HRM, There is something called HRM. There is something called HRD, Human Resources Development. There is something called International, IHRM, International Human Resources Management. There is something called Talent Management, and there is something called Strategic HRM. Now, these are all terms which are used for this particular function, but each of the term and each of the definitions that we look at is going. So when we look at the definition of the term HRM, what we are looking at here is that HRM is more or less a approach, or a it is a more or less it's an approach, or a type of a process which the management in the organization actually uses to ensure that people are able to work together and they are able to collectively achieve the objectives set by the organization. So sometimes when you look at the traditional definitions of HRM, what I can also look at is define it in such a way that sometimes what we tend to do is we look at just the generic definitions, but in general when we look at the whole meaning of HRM, what we are looking at basically saying is that it's a term which basically describes let's put it this way, some sort of formal systems or processes or policies which the organization actually follows, and these are put in place by the human resources manager, and these then look after key areas of staffing, recruitment, compensation, benefits, management of the talent, and also looking at job descriptions and responsibilities given to various employees within the organization. So here the idea would be to primarily understand that it is one of the most important pillars of the organization. This pillar is primarily responsible for the recruitment and selection of resources, which are people and employees within the organization. And last but not the least, this function basically in the context of strategic HRM would mean that if we look at long-term goals of any organization, then in terms of long-term planning, the role of the strategic role, that means the long-term planning goal of looking at continuously attracting people, look at continuously developing them, rewarding them, and then also retaining them in the organization to ensure that they continue to contribute and make efforts towards their goals, and they help the organization achieve the overall objective set by the management, is the strategic nature of HRM. Now, just briefly, we're looking at a bit of overviews and stuff. The stuff basically means that when we look at various functions, there are different types of functions of HRM. One second. So when we look at different types of functions of HRM, what we do classify them is that there are functions. When I mentioned functions of HRM, we basically mean functions like recruitment, selection. We look at things which are included from a point of view of understanding unions, for example. When we look at issues, legislation, all these would be typically included as what we call the functions of human resources management. Now, the functions can be defined in different format. Sometimes when you look at the functions overall, we are looking at recruitment, employee engagement, any sort of change being brought across, reward management, you look at compensation or employee benefits as we call them. And then when we look at negotiation and counseling, sometimes when you have issues, or when you have issues, yeah, you can join back. When you have issues with regards to issues within the company, what you will see is that different type of these functions are all handled by the HR manager. So over the years, what has happened is the functions of HRs have, there were 4 functions.
Yes. Yes.
Welcome back. Now, what we're looking at are different types of functions of HR. When we look at definitions, but over the years, as the field has evolved, what we've seen is the functions of HR has HRM has also expanded. So they include basic
Yes.
functions like, looking at recruitment selection, you look at, looking at compensation management, you look at reward management, you look at engagements, change if it has to be brought into the organization, change management, and the management of that change is also the function of HR. A simple example there would be if your organization decides to do a training to engage and bring a new version of IT system, for example, Windows 10.
Yes.
Then at some stage, there will be different types of users in the organization. They use different types of functions. There is a training program which they have to put together to ensure that the training is done. So sometimes they will look at, training the staff, the junior staff, the middle management, the senior management, and then the executive management in terms of transition. But this change then is brought out in a phased-wise manner, and this is also one of the functions of HR. Now, when we look at, talk about things like features of HRM, what we are looking at is that when we talk about features, you are looking at, different types of intent which HRM essentially is able to cater to. So when we look at marketing,
Yes.
look at three types of concepts: sales concept, production concept, and brand concept. These three type of concepts we look at. But when we look at
Yes.
different types of concepts in HRM, we look at strategic content or intent of the company when the policies are to be made, from a long-term perspective. We look at them being coherent, and we also look at, some of these things which are defined in this table. We look at commitment, how staff or people are treated as assets. We also look at, the unitarist approach, which is what we look at in one of the models. And in some cases, when we look at, the modern aspect of HRM, which is primarily the resource and delivery side of HRM. Now, the reason why we look at features of HRM is that what does the function actually do? I say I'm in marketing, but what do you actually do on a day-to-day basis? So literal meaning of the features of HRM is what do we do on a day-to-day basis? If I'm an HR manager, if I'm a manager which has responsibility for a lot of resources, the day-to-day basis would be things like planning, organizing, directing, controlling. These are the things which HR does on a day-to-day basis. So if they have to come up with a new process or a new policy, they have to say, when you think of appraisals, when you look at, recruitment selection, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis? They are actually planning, they are actually organizing, they're directing, controlling, they're looking at developing, reviewing, and in some cases, coming up with new policies, new plans, which the organization can look at. A simple example that I would give here. Normally what happens is when you start a new year, new financial year, the HR manager would sit with the department managers or different types of people within the organization to create an incentive policy for the next year. That, okay, this year the organization has achieved this much of target turnover, whatever it is, but next year, in order to achieve those targets or achieve those sales turnovers, we have to put some sort of a plan in place. So what the HR manager will do is sit with different people, get some ideas, look at, okay, what are you being given as a target? What is the increment? And then accordingly, the management gives a percentage saying that in 0.5% you have to plan the compensation policy for the organization of the turnover.
Yes.
And then they work and get down to work in terms of coming up with a policy like a reward incentive. If you achieve this much sales, you will get a free trip to Las Vegas. Or if you achieve this much, you will get this much bonus. Or if you achieve this and you also achieve this, you will be doing line for a promotion. And these kind of things is what HR actually looks at coming up with. Now, these are essentially things which are included in the day-to-day operations of HRM, and that is what we call features. Now, some of these features are strategic. You wouldn't find that an HR manager comes up with a policy wherein the target plan is what very well achievable, and the target is achievable and the policy allows you to gain more incentive or bonus. It is strategic that if you achieve over 125% or 100%, then you will get a delta of what you get as a bonus. Some of these plans have to be coherent. That means they have to be applied across the organization. It is not just sales, but marketing needs to have their own objectives. Like they increase the market share by 0.2% or 0.4%, they will get also bonus. We look at sales, administration, engineering, product support, people who are in the support function. So the plan has to be coherent. That means the incentive plan has to apply pan organization. It cannot be just for few set of people in the organization. Obviously, why these things are put in place? Because they want a commitment. They want to set a goal which is achievable. That drives commitment towards the organizational goals and objectives. Why do you think this is done? Sometimes if I have to do a devil's advocate job, I will also say, why do I need an incentive policy? We pay them enough. We pay them, handsomely. They get holidays, they get incentives, they get everything. But why do you need to put a plan in place? But when you look at that and you compare it with the aspect of why this is required, is because you are looking at the employee achieving something more than what is expected. You're not achieving, you're pushing them to achieve 100% target or more, and that is why you treat them as assets. And when you treat them as assets, you're looking at developing them by offering them training, skills enhancement, learning, and that would also make them wanted or, feel wanted, that the organization takes care of them. And similarly, some of these things that we look at within the features of HRM. Now,
yes,
if we have to step back, I know there are different departments within the organization. So in your company, you have marketing, you have operations, you have sales, you have HR, you have accounts and finance, or whatever you call it, finance and accounts.
yes,
and then
yes,
you have management, right? If
yeah,
if it's a manufacturing organization, you will also have maybe engineering and production and some departments like supply chain and procurement and things like that. But what is the work of a person who works within this department, HR? Their aim is to basically take care of this as a resource. Like you have a car, or you have, say, for example, a PC in the office, and you use that. Every year, the organization gets it serviced. The reason why they get it serviced, they want this PC to work well. The performance has to be good. It does not need to slow down. No viruses. Blah blah blah. Similarly, when we look at the role of HRM, their role is to maintain that the staff working within the organization is motivated, committed. They have right information and tools and techniques available to work. They are they have the relevant skills to be able to achieve that objective. So their goals are qualitative goals, and they work on human resource to ensure that, okay, this year you're going to be promoted as a manager, but as a manager you need to have leadership skills, negotiation skills, you need to have maybe presentation skills, but you do not have that qualification. Yes. So the HR manager will put a plan in place, which is a learning and development plan, and that learning and development plan will basically look at that employee who's looking at getting promoted from step A to B, or he will go on a journey. And this is what they do on a day in, day out basis. Now, when we look at the concepts, different types of, in the early 18th century, there were two concepts of HRM which was invented, and these concepts, talk about what is called the hard HRM and soft HRM. Okay. Now, hard HRM versus soft HRM, was that in hard HRM, the company treats the employees rationally. They see this, that they are one of the resource, but they see that this is an important resource which can make a difference to the organization. Now, example here would be when you look at Facebook, you look at all the organizations which are producing software or services, Facebook, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Amazon. Here, they see that employees are a strategic asset for the organization, because if you have good employees, you are able to basically, have efficient, smooth functioning within the organization. And this allows them to be, treated as, as a resource, which is important resource within the company. When you look at soft, HRM, they emphasize, something on more to do with, development of, say, they want high commitment, but you are treated as one of the resource. You are replaceable in the organization. When I say the organization or the business will treat you, as one of the resource which is doing a function, but that does not mean that your nature of work or the position in the organization is something going to be guaranteed. So what they say, if you're not performing well, you can be chucked out, you can be made redundant. And in this case, their focus is primarily on looking at things which are, treating them as one of the resource rather than a strategic resource. Is that okay?
Yes.
Now, these verses, when I say, there is a, we look at differences also, and we look at doing comparison between hard and soft HRM. So in hard HRM, we basically look at that, the management treats workers as one of the resource. You are one of the resource, which is a financial resource, administrative resource, this, that. But in soft HRM, the organization has a soft ear or has a soft heart towards you. So they look at your overall well-being. They look at things which is that if you are not happy, then you are not able to perform your role well. So that basic concept was hard and soft HRM. But today, when we look at the modern concept, most organizations use a combination of hard and soft approach to manage employees within the company. Is that okay? Now, I have a handout which I'm going to send to you, and this is going to be, looking at comparing hard and soft HRM in order to understand, the differences and, in detail that why this was something which was important to look at specifically when we look at, studying the HRM function.
Yeah.
Now, this slide typically shows a system of human resources or a department within an organization and what are all the kind of functions which they do, right? So if I've drawn this up, the reason of drawing this up is that we have broken down the key functions of recruitment, selection, training and development, rewards and compensation management, and employee relations. Where you have unions or where you have large number of employees within an organization, you normally have a department which looks after employee relations also. This is different from press relations or PR department. So
yes.
what I looked at is this is normally seen in manufacturing or engineering organizations, and each of the functions
true.
has been divided accordingly. So when we look at organizations, they look at designing a structure, whether we'll have a flat structure, hierarchical structure, functional structure. They look at creating job descriptions, and those job descriptions are then put into job responsibility for individual people within the organization. So this is a chart that you need to look at and understand that, okay, this is basically visually showing you what are the various things which HR department actually does. If it's a sizable company and they have a sizable department, they will look into capital management, human resources capital management, that means recruitment selection. They look at learning and training. They look at reward management, compensation management, retaining the most, important staff in the organization, and also look at industrial relations or employee relations. Now, there are some models which we need to understand from a theoretical standpoint of view, and I've put together one odd slide on each of the models. Because in Learning Outcome 1, it talks about illustrate key concepts and models governing strategic HRM. So here, the idea is to understand the different models which have evolved over the years. The first model that we're looking at is a matching model of HRM. This was proposed and developed by Fombram, Tichy, and Divana in the early 1980s. And here, what they say is that the key role of human resources, once the selection of the individual is done in the organization, that means you've been selected by the organization, then their key role is to look at managing your performance by looking at either giving you rewards, looking at developing you, and again managing performance. So here, when you look at organizations which are primarily in the engineering sector, or you look at high services sector, once the person has been recruited, they make sure that the person is productive and is able to meet the objectives of the tasks which are given. And they look at motivating that individual by two facts. Either they put them into training and development every year after a review when the gap areas are identified, or they incentivize the person by offering rewards, things like, when you understand incentive trips, bonus structures, and things like that. The second model, which is a more comprehensive model, and this was proposed by Michael Beer, and this is called the Harvard Business, not the business, but because it was developed in Harvard, it is called the Harvard Framework. And this model looks at a lot of other factors when they look at, human resources management within the organization. And this is a comprehensive model. They look at stakeholder interests. So when you look at hiring a CEO, there is a input of the stakeholders, that means shareholders, suppliers. You look at overall, the image of the organization, and here the stakeholders have a in the recruitment of that person, because at the end of the day, he's going to be a piece of the organization. He needs to get on well. He needs to have a lot of experience. For example, is stakeholders' interest. Then the HR also looks at situational factors. When they look at recruiting employees, what is the market, going rate for a manager in say Abu Dhabi in a particular sector like telecom? They look at, how they can attract the business person from a competitor's business. They look at the basic labor market, and they look at laws and legislation to make sure that when they put out a job advert, that is in line with what the market requirement is. And then they look at, choices of policy, when they look at how employees can be influenced, what kind of systems can be put in place, what kind of outputs those can produce. And in this case, the HR policy is also being reviewed by the board or the management to see if it's working or not. Who reviews the HR? HR is reviewed by either the board or maybe the chief executive, because at the end of the day, he or she working within the HR, coming out with all these policies and processes, also needs to be monitored to say that is it making an impact? Is it having a positive impact in terms of moving the organization forward? So there are 5 aspects to it in this model, and here they look at a strategic approach wherein they try and look at all the factors or all the people who are going to be stakeholders, which will be making the HR department work, and how this department will work with the other departments.
Yes.
And the next one talks about, the David Guest model. And the David Guest model is primarily known that it creates a link between HR and performance. So HR is primarily responsible for ensuring that they have put the main pillars of working in place, things like tools and techniques, training and development, and obviously the department is also responsible for ensuring that there are policies and practices available which everybody can adhere to. An example that I would give here is, when you join an organization, you are given an employee handbook. Why you are given an employee handbook is because the HR has created a set of policies and structures to say that everybody in the organization needs to follow that code. So if the organization starts at 9 a.m. and the work finishes at 5:30, that's the code which has been written. If you are a manager, you are supposed to dress up, the dressing up style, the policies on leave, maternity leave, casual leave, things like compensation, structure, all those things are, written down. And the reason of creating this structure is that they say that the HR, when the David Guest model study was introduced, they said that HR is the one which is able to create a link between performance and strategy of the organization. So the board actually creates this plan. They say the board creates the plan, but who breaks the plan down for individual departments, individual persons? Now the CEO has said, okay, we want to achieve 1 billion turnover, for example. But what does that mean to a normal man on the street who's working in the front end or, as a junior position in the company? Who breaks the target down into the overall strategy and make sure that everybody has the same understanding? So that link is between the HR and the strategy, and that is what that model proposed. The PATH model also proposes, similar things, but they look at taking much more detailed look into. If you recruit somebody and the recruitment turns out to be wrong, then that can be drastic for the organization, because the time is gone, you've spent money on recruitment, the person has created a negative impact in the organization, and that leads to the employer, the employee leaving the organization, but also the employer not achieving the target. So here, the link between people and performance is created, but what they look at is they look at the requirements of what you want when you take up a job and what the organization will provide when you take that job up. A simple example. You decide to change your job today and you are joining the competitor of where you probably work. Now, why you've taken that decision? Because the competitor is offering you a raise in salary, they are giving you maybe a promotion, their compensation might be better, rewards that they're giving is better, and this then allows you to look at that, okay, I've worked in the organization so many years, but I've not got this, but a competitor is recruiting me because of my experience and skills, and I'm getting something better than I'm getting here. And in that case, what tends to happen is, you look at that the HR will try and retain you, give you incentive, they'll say, okay, we'll match that offer which you have been given, but please don't leave. And this thing, in terms of creating that balance, is done by the HR. And that is what is looked at in detail in this model of, understanding the people's management and change. Now, what we also want to do is to understand to a certain extent how HR policies can impact their performance. Right? A simple example that I will give here. would be that if the organization decides to move the office, and the office is now relocating to a different location, which is going to affect your daily coming into the office, which creates a bit of dissatisfaction and also, demotivation. Then why are we moving, and I will need to move, and it will become more cumbersome for me to travel. Say your company decides to move office from Abu Dhabi to Sharjah.
Yes.
That would mean that you will either start looking at that I can't stay, I need to find a job, or it will start saying that, okay, the company will do a consultation saying that, okay, some of the employees can continue to work here, but it's a long-term strategic objective of what we have taken is that we want to reduce cost of office and office expenditure, and that's why we are moving to a different location where there is less competition, saving on costings, but we will help relocate some of the employees if they want to go there.
Yeah.
But if you decide not to, then what will happen is you will basically be a passenger in the organization, and for a couple of weeks, months, then you find a new job and then you switch over. But this is something which the organization can pick up from HR, because they will do a review, they will do a study to say how many employees are happy, how many are not moving, how many are moving, what the organization can do. And this then has an impact on the performance of the organization. Is that okay?
Yes, correct.
Now, when we look at how do we assess the role of HR, in different types of things that they do, how do we assess their role? We look at basically assessing their role from a point of view of how happy the employees are within the organization, do they feel that they are adequately supported in terms of different policies, structures, compensation, bonus schemes, rewards, and things like that. And if they are able to correlate that they are getting what they want, they are getting paid good, their pay is at par with the competitors, you are getting the same incentives or perks as most of your competitors get, you are being looked after in the organization in terms of training and development, you are having you are adequately rising in your career, that means you are getting promoted, you are getting the training, you are increasing in terms of responsibilities. This kind of a review, which is done by the management, and when they do a review that, okay, how is this performing, how is that performing, this is where they also try and evaluate how the HR is performing within the organization.
Yeah.
And sometimes you will see that the organizations also do something called a 360-degree review. And the
360-degree, yes.
Yeah, 360-degree review is done, you might have an appraisal with your boss, and your boss might not like you and give you a good appraisal or a bad appraisal, but that is not a true reflection of how you actually performed in the year. And it should not mean that just because your boss has not rated you well, you are not in line for getting a rise in salary or promotion or, a raise in whatever you are doing in terms of roles and responsibilities. So here, the organization at senior levels asks peers to also review and asks the management to also do a review, and that review, which involves peers, subordinates, seniors, and your juniors, to basically do a review of the individuals. And this is normally done through the route of, sending a survey or maybe sending some sort of a questionnaire, and people will do rate you on your skills and how you perform and how you work within the organization. So when we look at that, sometimes they break the role of the HR up into different types. So in the HR department also, you see there are lots of different type of people which do. There is somebody who does payroll. There is somebody who does appraisal. There is somebody who does training and development. There is somebody who is responsible only for coming up with strategy or maybe new policies or new procedures which are required for the organization. And in some cases, you will see that there will be somebody who is an overall head of the department who is going to be responsible for reviewing what is happening on a day-to-day basis, weekly, monthly, and annual basis. So sometimes the HR people, because of the complexity and the size of the organization, there will also be different types of roles within the HR department. And in large organizations, you will see that these roles vary. So these roles could become a partner role. There could be a strategic role. Some of the roles could be roles like the interventionist or innovator. Sometimes you will see in organizations an HR person is also called the internal consultant. And in some cases, you will also have external organizations working with you to do monitoring to ensure that you are compliant with the rules and regulations required in the organization or in that geography. And I'll give you an example for this to understand. When we look at monitoring, these large firms like Ernst & Young, PwC, and you look at, Accenture, they offer services to big companies on accounting, finance, and human resources management. Why do they do that? Is because these companies, have global operations. So if you look at Unilever or you look at Coca-Cola, for example, these companies work across geographies. Now, when you look at people working within the department, what will happen is you will see that people working within the department are actually, at some stage they become a bit complacent, by doing the day-to-day operations. So what the board does, or the management does, is brings external consultants like PwC, Ernst & Young, and Accenture, these kind of organizations, to come in and do a quality check or an audit. And this is being done primarily to promote and look at whether the HR is following all the law and legislation within the organization. So if you hire people in Abu Dhabi, you hire people in India, you hire people in US, Singapore, there is different legislation, different tax structure, different type of requirements which the HR needs to have. So that audit is done through the monitoring role of HR. But this could be, a permanent role or a short-term role, because they come in and do the audit and then present the report to the board and they see, okay, everything is working well. Similarly, you can have different types of roles. Now, when you look at Facebook, all the millennial organizations like Facebook, LinkedIn, all these, Amazon, eBay, you will see that here the role of the HR manager is like a partner role or a business partner role. So because there are lots of different projects which the company is working on, teams which are focused on software and creation of code, normally you will see that if there are a certain number of people working within a project, there's an HR partner manager also tagged along in that, because he or she needs to look after the particular requirements of those people working in that particular project. And that is where the role is a partner manager role, because they are seen to be working as peers rather than as subordinates or as bosses. So there are different types of roles that you could see, and what I put together here is the different definitions of some of these roles, like a business partner role. Okay. Now, if we get into the last part of the learning outcome 1, what we need to do is understand the role of HR and how we can differentiate the role of HR. There are 3 different types. One role is a role which we work on a day-to-day basis. Okay. The second role will be to look at long-term planning. How is the long-term planning? Long-term planning. Like you look at Marks and Spencer in the UK, they have introduced something called Plan A 2020. So this was introduced in 2014, and as per this plan, Rose Stewart, who was the chief executive at that point in time, came out with a plan saying that Marks and Spencer will go 100% environmentally friendly, reduce the effects of packaging recycling by 2025. Now, when this plan was introduced, he created something which was a long-term vision that today we need to be looking after the environment and make sure that there is less of waste management being done when we look at selling our products and services to consumers. Now this plan, which is a long-term plan, it's a 10-year plan, is to be broken down into smaller objectives which will be included into job descriptions of employees working on a day-to-day basis or doing day-to-day tasks. So HR, in this case, looks at strategic planning to break that plan down and break it into individual components so that they can be adapted into job description of each individual. So that is the strategic nature. The second thing that they try and do is that they try and work with, the operational side of things. So the second function would be operational model, wherein they work on a day-to-day activity, and there the idea is to contribute towards ensuring that anything which is required to get those things done are made available. Resources which could be other infrastructure resources which are required to achieve the goals on a weekly, monthly basis. And then the third function they look at is how they themselves contribute to something called the achievement of that plan. So HR also looks at what are the front-end functions of an organization. Normally the front-end functions of the organization are business development, product engineering, you look at sales and marketing. There are support functions in the organization, and these support functions would be things like administration, accounts, HR, engineering, or manufacturing in some cases. But it depends on how the organization is structured. So their role in terms of working with some of these departments to ensure that they are able to move the goalpost and move them forward would be the part of contribution or working in conjunction with other departments to ensure that the achievement of these objectives can be done. So broadly, if you have to quantify what are the functions of the HR, we can classify them into strategic, operational, and day-to-day functions, which are primarily, under which their group, their roles and responsibilities is done. Now, there are lots of HRM models, okay? So what I've done in the balance slides is I've looked at different models and have summarized them into one slide each so that you get a synopsis of, the different types of models which came about, when we look at the evolution of, the frameworks of HR within the organization.
Yes.
Now, apart from that, I think these are going to be, let's put it this way, slides which are self-explanatory. And towards the third part, what you have to do is pick up one or two models to basically analyze them, talk about them, and pick up an organization to show how this model is working within the organization. So my question to you would be, for task 1.3, you look at studying these models and look at which model do you think is applied or can be applied within your organization.
Okay, yes.
Is that okay? And I put some basic, steps in place or some additional slides that you can go through. We talk about some of the detailing of, how HR works with other departments, with different companies, like strategies they have and things like that.
Yes.
Okay, so learning outcome is primarily looking at studying three things. Types of, role of HRM. We want to look at what are the various models which have evolved over the years, how people, performance, productivity, efficiency, staffing, recruitment are linked within different models. And last but not the least, to pick out a model which applies to you or your organization in the modern context and do a bit of evaluation to say that this is what I see and this is how I see in the HR working within my organization.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No
worries. Any questions on this so far, Deepak?
No. Actually, I need to go through and I have to read this. I will be asking questions.
That's fine.
HR is a little bit vast subject than others.
Yeah.
And so I need to read again understand the model there. It's on there, okay?
And what I'm going to do is, after this session, send you a copy of this presentation, which is going to be available on Moodle, but also give you some handouts for task 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, so that you can see the application and theory with an example.
Okay, sure. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Deepak.
Sure. Thank you.